All right, this is Nathan Zimmerman. This is my presentation on the Battle of Little Bighorn, which occurred on June 25th, 1876. So, for some background, basically the reason why the conflict occurred was because there was a large amount of settlers that were heading west in the late 1800s, and most of the motivation for this was gold, but the area of southern Montana was becoming more of a desirable location for settlers. So the natives that were already living in the area, the Plains natives, were asked by the government to move onto reservations. And if they didn't move on to reservations, they would be deemed as enemies of the state. So that's why the Native Americans were not too happy. And they ended up sending out the military to try and remove some of the people forcefully. Um, this is a map of the area of Montana where uh, the Bighorn River is, and the Little Bighorn is this little offshoot right here, kind of at the top of it. So that's where the battle took place. So the leader of the Lakota people was Sitting Bull, who's one of the most famous Native Americans. He was apparently really charismatic and was not a fan of the white intervention that was happening at the time, and he led a kind of resistance movement against the government. And a lot of people actually left the reservations to join Sitting Bull. And the leader of the attack was Commander George A. Custer, yeehaw, and his 7th Division Cavalry, depicted here as Bill Hader from Night at the Museum. He was in the American Civil War, but he's most famous for leading his entire cavalry to their deaths at the Battle of Little Bighorn. So the reason why the battle didn't go so well for Custer was because they were basically ordered to move in on the area weeks before they had planned to attack. And they had kind of surrounded the area that Sitting Bull was occupying, because they were planning to attack with like multiple columns of troops. And there was an eastern column and a western column, and they were going to try and sandwich the Lakota like in between the different troops. But that did not work out because they were sort of camped out on the outskirts of the area, and some Lakota people spotted them, and then Custer decided to immediately charge with all of his troops into the center of the Lakota area. So some not very well thought out decision making by George A. Custer there. And the battle lasted a pretty long time because the Native Americans kind of just like chased around the 7th Cavalry, and he actually split up the 7th Cavalry to try and evade the attacks and kind of chase the natives down, but it ended up just making it so that no one could support each other, so they kind of just floundered around for a few hours, and the Native Americans outmaneuvered them. And they were eventually forced up onto a high ground. And this is where the last stand part comes from, because they kind of like tried to hold this high ground. But the natives had better weapons, and they were also just better at fighting people. So Custer's entire squadron got slaughtered. So rest in peace, George A. Custer. June 25th, 1876. Most of their horses were stolen by the natives, and a lot of the native stories that surround the Battle of Little Bighorn kind of focus on the native named Crazy Horse. I forget his native name. I also probably can't pronounce it, but he was kind of the Lakota hero of the battle. He was the leader of the Oglala tribe of the Lakota. And for sort of like a legacy or the aftermath actually was the U.S. Army just sent more troops, and then they eventually had to surrender. And but the legacy was that the white people felt pretty embarrassed by the defeat, and it really cemented the idea in the heads of the Americans of like the hostile, savage Native American, and it tarnished the way that white people viewed Native Americans basically forever, and it led to a lot of other conflicts like Wounded Knee. It's not really conflict, it's more just a massacre. It led to Wounded Knee, and their depiction in television and movies is influenced by this battle. And the Battle of Little Bighorn is where we really start to see like the downfall and increased white hostility towards Native people. So that's all I've got on the Battle of Little Bighorn. Yeah.